A very warm welcome to all of you. So, in this particular webinar, as already introduced to you by Mr. Dheeraj, what we intend to do is the agenda for the session is to talk about how to improve on time management. Now, time management, in our opinion, we have been analyzing GMAT for the last 25 years, and I personally have interacted or guided around 25,000 plus people. So what I'll be sharing with you is whatever expertise we have gathered over the last 2+ decades while interacting with GMAC, as well as while interacting with the students and while interacting with the core team of people I work with. So I, on this behalf, I'm representing Jamboree, and it's a privilege to take this webinar on the behalf of the whole team. Just to still set the agenda very clear, the intention of this webinar is to talk about there would be people from a different backgrounds in the context that they will be in a different stages of your GMAT preparation. So we'll do a quick introduction for a minute or two, about 2-3 minutes, I may say, about the GMAT as such, what is the structure. Then we'll get into why is time management important. You must have heard about it, you must know it, that time management is important, but we'll get into some real facts why it's important for us to manage time well based on a limited preparation, how we can maximize our scores if we manage time properly. That's the basic core agenda. Now, once we have discussed why is it important, then we will discuss the basic idea how we improve on time management. In other words, how do we ace the quantitative section based on specifically keeping a very simple strategies of time management into picture. And we will discuss a couple of strategies with examples to see how we can improve on that. So how we can basically minimize time which we spend on respective questions, and hence broadly enhance the time management on the GMAT and hence have a best score. So let's get started. And as already mentioned, if you have any questions or queries with relevance to what we are talking about, we would request you to write on a chat so that we can address them there and then. But there would be some questions which we will be addressing over a period of this webinar, the way it has been designed. So if the question which you are asking me which we have anyway planned to discuss later, we will discuss in the latter part of the session. So that's the basic agenda for the session. So let me get started. Okay. So first to talk about GMAT, I'm pretty sure if you're already attending this webinar on time management, you already know what GMAT is all about. But to still give a brief idea, your GMAT is fundamentally made up of 4 sections. First one typically is analytical writing assessment of 4 sections. One of them is analytical writing assessment, in which an argument is stated. You got to express your own views for that argument, finding your reasons in support of that argument or finding the flaws in that. That's for 30 minutes. Then you have a section, the second section, I would say that another section, important one, is integrated reasoning, which has 12 questions to be addressed in 30 minutes. Then you have a quantitative section, 31 questions to be addressed in 62 minutes. And then a verbal, basically 36 questions to be addressed in 65 minutes. So you can see in the next slide that there are different formats of these questions. IR, integrated reasoning, has 4 different formats already displayed on your screen. Quantitative, we have fundamentally 2 types of questions. One is problem solving, one is data sufficiency. In a verbal section, you are fundamentally tested on 3 types, that is sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension, right? So this was a basic idea. Now, different people look forward for different scores based on the schools you are targeting and the courses you are targeting. A very brief idea for the scores you are targeting. This is not the complete list, but this is a broad idea list to give you an idea. Okay, if you're targeting a 700, then there are multiple permutations, combinations to get that score. Similarly, if you're targeting a 730 or a 760 or a 670, these are broad permutations, combinations. In this sense, if you're good at maths, then you can get a slightly less in verbal will work. But if you're not that great at maths and you fortunately are great at verbal, then you can compensate your lack of comfort with maths with the better score on a verbal. So there is no one, I would say, a particular breakup of quantitative section and a verbal section which gets you that score, right? So these are broad ideas. Now, one of the things we want to talk about today is we know GMAT is a standardized test. Now, before we get into why is time management important, let's take a step back and analyze the standard structure of a GMAT. Once you understand how the GMAT is designed, what are they testing you on, you will much more appreciate how we can have a standard strategies to maximize our scores, right? So one of the things I want to clarify is, now this is coming from GMAC. So this is by the test maker themselves, right? We fortunately had a privilege of interacting with GMAC team for the last couple of years. So these are the feedbacks we have gotten. This is directly coming from the test maker. Now, one of the things which is critical for us to notice is that a test, according to GMAC, is defined by the skills that it measures, right? Now, how is it important? So they say if the content mix were to vary, the skills being assessed would vary. Hence, the reliability would be reduced. Now, what is the relevance of this is that GMAT is testing you on a certain skills. They're not random skills. Every person is fundamentally tested on a certain skills. That's the way the GMAT as a test is designed. So once you understand the skills, once you build up on those skills, that can sort of almost guarantee that you'll have a good score on your GMAT, right? Now, every test taker will have the same number of questions on each type of questions. Now, this is very important. So you'll have exact same number of critical reasoning questions. You'll have exact same number of sentence correction questions and reading comprehension. Similarly, problem solving and data sufficiency, which are scored. This is standard for every GMAT administered globally, right? Not only that, you have the same number of questions on each sub area. So that's important. And it's also important to notice, according to GMAC, a quant score of a 43, let's say a person took a way back in 2002, vis-a-vis a person takes in 2011 or in 19, if he gets the same score of 43 scale score, it means the ability of a person is the same, right? So the scale scores are standard globally, and that can only reflect if the skills were standard which were being tested on, right? Now, these was just to clarify that GMAT is a standardized test. Now, we all know it's a standardized test. If you understand it's a standardized test, and you should utilize the standardized nature of this test for your benefit. So in the context, the skills which GMAC is testing you on have not fundamentally altered over the decades. Now, that's critical thing to notice, right? Okay. Now they introduced an IR section about 5 to 6 years back, but the skills in a quantitative section when we are talking about, as it's on fundamentally time management on a quant section, so we'll focus on that. The skills in the quantitative sections have not altered in any way over the last decade. So we need to acknowledge that and use it for our best benefit to get the best scores, right? Now, another thing which I want to mention is, let's talk about the time management, which is a core agenda for the session. Okay, now I'm sure you would have heard about that the first few questions are important on the test, right? Now, why are the first few important? I think anyone who has done a bit of a research on GMAT would analyze that GMAT starts with a moderate level. As you go on marking, right, the level goes on getting higher. So it's important to mark the first few questions right so that your level has gone higher, so that even if you make a mistake or two, it doesn't fall back to a very low level. So it's important to mark the first few questions correct, right? So hence they are important. Now, this I guess most of us already know. If you did not know, now you know it. But what's more important to notice is that the last few questions are also important. Now I want to ask you a quick question. I guess everyone would have heard about that time management is important, and hence the last few questions are, it's important to finish the test. Does anyone of us know why is it important to finish the test? Or in other words, what is a penalty a person gets if a person is not able to finish the test? I would put a poll. I would request, to put a poll. So in this case, please answer. Do you know what sort of a penalty is there if you don't answer if you are not able to complete the question? Because we need to understand it's important for us to complete the test. Why is it important for us to complete the test? Why is time management important? Once you understand the whole scenario, why is it important, it will become much more easier to appreciate the skills and the things we'll be working on post it. Okay, so as far as the polls we have gotten that 81% of the people have still said that they're not very clear with how and why, sorry, the why, what do your penalty, what is the penalty we are talking about. So let's get started with that. Now, this next slide will give you an idea what sort of a penalty are we talking about. Now, let me use a pen and explain you what I mean. Let's say there were two test takers, test taker A and test taker B. Let's say both started at the same level. So let's say initial raw score would be the same, correct? Let's say first 28 questions which they attempted, they got the same questions, they marked in the same performance. Let test taker A, test taker B, both attempted the same questions correct and same questions wrong. So do you acknowledge post 28 questions the raw score would be the same? Because they both started at the same level. Whenever A marked it correct, B also marked it correct. Whenever A marked it wrong, B also marked it wrong. So you would acknowledge that after 28 questions, they would be at the same level or the same raw score. Let me take the raw score as R dash. Let's say test taker B marked the remaining 3 questions wrong, whereas test taker A left 3 questions. Right? I think you're clear with the scenario. Both started at the same level. After 28 questions, first of all, the performance was same in sync. After 28 questions, they would be at the same level. But test taker B marked 3 questions wrong, whereas test taker A left 3 questions. Now, do you acknowledge the raw score of test taker B, which we are referring to as RB out here, would be slightly lower than R dash because you would have marked them wrong, the score would have dipped a bit. Whereas this would have remained the same as R dash because the person stopped the test out here. Now, what's critical to notice is that though RB is less than RA or R dash right now, however, once a paper is finished, GMAC or GMAT multiplies the raw score by the percentage of attempted questions, not correct questions, attempted questions. So what you need to acknowledge out here is the multiplication factor is 1, whereas out here the multiplication factor is about 0.9. So this person's score would dip directly by 10%. So hence it's important to finish the paper. Even if you mark them wrong, you are in a better position than leaving the questions or ending the paper without completing it, right? So are we clear on this part? Anyone has any quick questions, you can put it on a chat. So are you getting this point, guys, clear that it's important to finish the paper, though you should try to maximize and get as many questions correct as you can, but it's very critical that you finish the paper because of this multiplication factor. So if you finish the paper, you will be multiplied by 1. If you're not able to finish the paper, you could directly say, on an average, each unattempted questions will dip your score by around 3 percentage points. So it's important for us to finish the paper. That's number 1, right? Okay. Now let me move on. Okay. Someone by the name Rashmi is asking, does timing of marking the answers also matter? I want to be very clear on this. How much, Rashmi, how much time you spent on a question, GMAT does not. Now I'll tell you where it's our opinion or our research. But when I say GMAT does not, it's directly coming through GMAC. We have been interacting with them. And typically the questions which you are going to ask us, we have already interacted with them and gotten the answers for. So Rashmi, I want to be very clear, GMAC does not track how much time you spent on a given question. So let's say a person attempted a given question in 1 minute and B attempted the same question in 2 minutes, both would have the same benefit of marking that question correct. correct? So whether you spend 10 seconds on a question or 20 seconds on a question, that will be immaterial, because they said at the end of the day, what they're expecting us to do is 36 questions in verbal and 31 questions in math in the allocated time, right? Okay. Let's move on the next part, guys. So this was so you need to understand it's important for us to finish the paper, right? Okay, so first few are important, last few are important. So bottom line is we would request you to do is that consider each question is important, because each question is adding on to the score. Let's keep it that simple, right? Another thing which I want to mention out here is time management is important, but it's also important that you do not unnecessarily, you need to use the time wisely on the test. So one of the concerns which I normally come across is, which if you have taken the test, you will understand what I'm saying. When you are attempting a question, sometimes we start thinking about whether the question is right or wrong. In the context, one thing I want to clarify, another before I get into that, your preparation should be focused on what would get you the best results. So just to clarify, this is the broad number of questions you get from these topics. So we have not listed all the topics out there. We have just listed a broad idea about the topics. So if you notice, the numbers is the most important topic. Then comes inequality, absolute value. A question or two here and there vary because there are some pre-test questions. They could be from any topic. But however, this is the broad breakup of some major topics. Now, one thing which I want to acknowledge out here, and I want you to get in this case, is that you need to, if you have enough time to master every topic, you should master every topic during your preparation. However, if you have a limited time during your preparation, then you should master the topics which will fetch you maximum results. Now, one of the topics, based on my experience of the last 2 decades, what I've noticed is there are some topics people too much focus on, which is not a wise way, because they don't get the return on the time spent is not there. So what I want you to notice is that in this permutation, combination, and probability, which I've normally noticed people normally want to spend too much time on or end up spending too much time on if they are not aware about it, you will hardly get 1 or 2 questions on permutation and probability combined, right? So you need to be wise that if you have a limited time, then you are typically expected to get 2 questions on Venn diagrams and typically 1 or 2 questions on permutation probability. On an average, I could say for almost everyone present on this webinar, you would be much more comfortable with Venn diagrams than with permutation and probability. So if you're not comfortable, then working on Venn diagrams would make much more sense to get the maximum result out of your preparation than permutation probability. So what I'm trying to bring across in this particular through this slide is that if you have the time, you should master every topic. However, if you have a limited time, you should work on the topics which will fetch you maximum results. Do not overstretch yourself on a given topic as such, right? That's the point I want you to bring across, that you have to work with not what you want to work on, but what will fetch you the best results based on what the test is testing us on, right? Now let's work on the concept of a time management. One thing I want to point out is, which is very critical. Now you need to acknowledge we have a limited time on GMAT. So your whole of the time should be spent on analyzing the question rather than thinking on whether the previous question was right or wrong. Tell me one thing. If you mark a question, let's say you are approaching a test, if you suddenly get an easy question, what does that mean? Any reasons? I repeat, just think for it. The answers are going to be on the slide. So let's say you can write on a chat whatever you want to write. So if you could express your answers on a chat as such. So what do you think are the reasons? If you get suddenly an easy question on the paper, what are the reasons in your view? So Avantika is asked
for one answer for experimental questions, and previous question was wrongly answered. The previous answer was incorrect. Might be the previous on to be wrong. My last question was wrong.
Thank you.
Maybe previous question is wrongly answered. Yeah. So this is the bigger opinion.
Perfect. So there are 3 reasons according to GMAC. Now, what we have normally noticed is people end up, okay, so first of all, what are the reasons of a previous question could be wrong? You're absolutely right. Most of you have correctly stated. Number 1, it could be that the previous question is wrong. Now, you know, it's an adaptive paper. If you mark a question wrong, the system believes you're not at that level. So system will ask you a simpler question. That's one logic, correct? So it could be very well a possibility that the previous question is wrong. So second thing is, it could be very well possible that the previous question was right. However, the question which you are getting right now, you are very comfortable with the concept. So it does not mean the previous question was wrong. Previous question could have been right also, right? Second thing is, in the sense that you personally are very comfortable with the concept, right? And it also depends upon nationalities. Some people are comfortable within some education system. You are more comfortable with exponents. Some people are more comfortable with algebra and so forth. It could also be according to GMAC, as most of you have, some of you have pointed out, it could be that it's a pre-test question. Now, pre-test questions are experimental questions which do not have any percentiles associated with it. So GMAT is using those questions to make a data bank for the future test takers. So they could pop up, these questions could come up anywhere on the test, and they would be of different difficulty levels. So my point of bringing across this point out here is that when you get an easy question, the previous one could be right, previous one could be wrong, or this could be experimental. So when you're approaching a question, do not bother about whether this question is easy or it's tough, or the previous one was right or it was wrong. You have a limited time, so focus on the question at hand and get this answered and move on. So do not use your precious time in evaluating why did you get this question easy as such during the middle of the paper, right? That's very critical. So whole of your energy, whole of your focus while taking the actual GMAT should be focusing the question at hand and not bothering about what is the next level of a question you're going to get or what was the level of the previous question, right? So this was the basic idea. Now let me move on to the specific math part of it. These were the general ideas on GMAT. Now math specific question, if you notice, is checking on a couple of scales. Now you need to know the basic concepts in place. You need to understand the question well, and then you need to have an approach for a question, right? So holistically, to address any maths question, these are the basic 3 skills required. You need to know the basic concept, you need to understand the question, and you need to have an approach to solve it. So what is the idea for today's webinar is to fundamentally focus on the approach, right? Okay, I'll also like to take a step back to understand, to discuss with you what is GMAT testing you on in the maths section, right? Now, when we ask this question, so what is the approach? So what is GMAT testing you on? Let me ask you this way. Now, some people end up thinking it's an application of basic concepts, which is absolutely fine to a certain extent. Some people say at the end of it, it's a common sense, what they're testing us on. Some say it's a formulae. Some say GMAT is testing on short tricks and shortcuts and so on. But according to GMAC, what they're focusing on is higher order reasoning skills. Now, it's a very heavy word, but if you understand what are they focusing on, then the whole preparation becomes that much convenient, right? Let me check you, what do I mean by reasoning skills? Let me take you a simple example, and then we'll take it further from there. So if I state this, that A, B, C, D are equally spaced points on a number line, as you can notice. And if I ask you, what is the value of B? So we would request you to write your answer on a chat, please. You can take your time. We'll wait for 10 more seconds. Okay. So
all of the answers that we got were C.
Okay, how many people?
7, 8 people, and there's one E.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, guys. Now this will give you an idea where we need to understand what GMAC is testing us on, or what GMAT is testing us on. Now, sometimes we go with what we think, or we go with the gut feel. Now we look at this table and we end up assuming, okay, this is 2 raised to power 12, this is 2 raised to power 11, so this should be 2 raised to power 10. That's what we end up thinking. Or let me put it the other slide actually. We end up thinking it's 2 raised to power 10, and majority of us right now have marked the option C, which was 2 raised to power 10, right? What you need to acknowledge out here is, as I mentioned, reading the question is very critically important. So what you need to acknowledge out here is, it says they are equally spaced points. Now this is the key. You have not to go by the gut feel on your test that this thing is right. You have to go by the reasoning associated with it. So now those who consider 2 raised to power 10, you typically went by the looks of the figure because it seems like a pattern. But what you need to understand is the data given to you. He says they are equally spaced points. When they are equally spaced points, it means the terms are in arithmetic progressions. Now, when we say the terms are in arithmetic progression, it means there's a constant difference between any two points on this number line as such. So when we say equally spaced points, let's keep the arithmetic progression out because I do not know your comfort level. It simply means there is a constant difference. The distance between B and C is going to be the same as the difference between C and D. In other words, B would come out to be twice the C minus D, which in this case would be 0. So very few people marked it wrong, but it's great some people marked it right. That is E option. So what the point I'm making out here is, you have not to go by the gut feel, right? Time management is important on the test, but that does not mean you'll answer the question in 10 seconds. Every question which GMAT is asking you, there is a reason why they're asking you that question, right? There is a skill associated which they are testing us on. So it could be possible. So though officially you are given about 2 minutes per question, but your target should be to do a question in a minute's time, right? Why? Because the tougher questions will come in. As you will mark them right, the tougher questions will come in and they will need more time. But under any condition, do not mark a question in less than half a minute, right? It's rarely that such a simple question will be asked which will be able to answer in 10 seconds or 15 seconds, right? Are you getting that point, guys? So if you are very comfortable with the concept and the moment you look at a question, you know what is he asking, then we would request take a step back, think twice, think 10 seconds more, because if you're comfortable with the concept, then spending 10 seconds is not going to goof up your time management. But at the same time, if you're good at maths and you mark the question right quickly but mark it wrong, doesn't help us. So the point I wanted to make this across, this particular point, was reading the question is important, and you need to understand the reasoning you need to apply in the question rather than going by the gut feel, right? I think you've gotten the point. Just to answer one question, Avantika is asking one question, that if a person is comfortable with probability and not with Venn diagrams. Avantika, the point I was mentioning in the previous question was, if someone is comfortable with permutation combination, wonderful, but you definitely need to be comfortable with Venn diagrams. So my point was, if a person is not comfortable with both, then working on Venn diagrams first and mastering that would, in my view, make more sense, because it will be a shorter topic. You will be able to master that quickly than on permutation and probability. They will take a more amount of time, and if you have a limited time, then mastering Venn diagram would make more sense. Fundamentally, if you have a time and you're looking for an awesome score, then you need to master both the ideas, right? Okay. So let's get started. So in general, basically, the point I was so far making was, managing time on the test day is a function of multiple things. Number one, we should be focused on the question at hand and not think about whether the previous one was right or wrong and so forth. That's number one. And also want to inform you, most of you would be in the stages of your preparation. So fundamentally, to build upon, to manage time well on the D-Day, it's important for you to build up the strategies on the way which will help you manage time on the D-Day. By just thinking that you want to manage time on the D-Day will to a certain extent have a limited impact. So we normally believe when you are making a study plan, most of you would be in the different stages of your preparation. But when you are making a study plan, the first stage is to build up the theoretical concepts associated and the methodologies associated, which will help you reduce time, number one. And then the phase two comes practice of those concepts with the methodologies you have studied so that you can see that in action. And then you do the full length testing to see can you apply the concepts which you learned in the phase one and phase two, and are you able to replicate those ideas in the testing phase. So these are the three different steps you need to follow to manage time very well. So let me explain you through an example. So before we get into the example, I want to also point out one thing. So this was basically the phase one of your session webinar for the day. So what we have talked about so far is what is the basic GMAT all about, the structure and the types of questions we got. And then we talked about time management is crucially important. Why? Because if you're not able to finish the paper, there's a huge penalty associated with that. And we discussed the penalty. What is the penalty we are talking about? So it's important to value every question as it appears so that you can get the maximum out of your preparation and out of your GMAT test date, I would say, right? Now, what we are moving on is we'll be moving on to different parts of this webinar. Now we're moving on to see how you can build up the concept or how you can improve on time management during your preparation, during your practice, and on the testing date, right? So this was the completion of the first part of the webinar. Let's move on to the next part where we'll do an examples to see how you can improve on time, right? So part one of the webinar, let's start now. What we'll be working on is, we'll be working on 2 or 3 different strategies today based on how much time we have. And we'll see what strategies we would request you to work, how you can apply those strategies to reduce your time on the test date. The whole objective is to reduce the time you spent on a question on a test date so that you can manage time well, right? So let's get started. So I'll ask you a question. This is a very simple elementary question. I would like you to take your time. I'll give you a minute and a half on this. So once you've attempted the question, please write on a chat. What's your answer? I'm timing you for a minute and a half, as I said. Last 15 seconds, please. 1.5 minutes are up. I'll just give you 15 more seconds if someone is in the final stages of who wants the time to write on a answer on a chat, please.
Okay, so far we have predominantly C answers. We have 3 or 4 A's, 1 B, and 1 D.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, guys. This is one of the questions which is a very typical one. Fortunately, most of us have marked it right. That's option C. That is 2 by 5. But what I want to emphasize out here is, I would like to know out here how many of you have been Jamboree students as such. If you could write on a chat. You have already taken a course with Jamboree and have done the prep. If you could write on a chat, guys, how many of you have taken either an online or any course with Jamboree? Okay.
Okay, we have 14 or 15 people.
Perfect. Out of how many?
Out of
okay, perfect.
45 attendees.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, guys. Now, some of you have already done a course and you would know how the things work, but let me clarify how the things. Now, in this particular question, now it's very wonderful to see that some of us have marked it correct, and some have marked it 13 by 60, and some have marked other options. Now, in a question like this, so let me pick up this example to discuss what is the strategy to be kept into consideration. Now, this is what you typically refer to as a work rate problem, which comes under a broad category of the word problems, because typically a description is given, you got to express into mathematical formation or equation and then solve it, correct? Now, in this particular case, it says A does 1/3 of the work and then goes away. Then B does 1/4 of the work and then goes away. Now, those who have already done a course with Jamboree would have already gotten an answer. So bear with me for a minute or two, because there are many other people who are joining have not done this, don't know how to approach. So let me discuss this at length. Now, in a question like this, we got to take the work as something. Normally, we take the work as 1 or X. Nothing wrong with 1 or X, but normally when you take the work as 1 or X, you end up typically with the wrong answer, typically with the 13 by 60 answer, those who gotten it, right? So what I would suggest you to do is, I'll directly come to the point which we want to go to. There's no point analyzing why you made a mistake, those who made a mistake. Let's come to the point how to rectify that and what is the best strategy for a question like this. Now, what you need to notice is when the fractions are given in a question, and you have to take the work as something, rather than 1 or X, prefer to take it as product of denominators, that is 60. Now, initially, I understand totally that we'll be more comfortable with 1 or X, and 60 seems to be kind of strange number as such. However, if you take it as product of denominators, when a question involves fractions, if you take it as product of denominators, it will become convenient for you because it will guarantee that you will end up working only with integers. Let me clarify how it works. Now, if the total work was 60, A does 1/3 of the work, that will be 20, right? So how much of the work is left? That will be 40, because 60 minus 20 will give you 40. Then B does 1/4 of this work, that is going to be 10. I'll repeat, total work we have taken it as 60. That is nothing new, but a product of this denominators 3, 4, and 5, right? We'll take the work as product of denominators. Why I'm requesting you to take it as product of denominators is because it will guarantee that you'll end up working only with integers. And you in general will be much more comfortable working with integers than with fractions, right? So let's take the work as 60. If A does 1/3 of the work, so A would do 20 units of work, or 20 work is done. How much is left? 40 units of the work is left. B does 1/4 of this work, that is 10. So how much work is left after that? That will be 30. So C does 1/5 of this work, that is 6. So what part of the work is left? That is 24. You started with 60, so what part of the work is left? 2/5 is left. So in general, whenever a question involves percentages, prefer to take it as 100. But whenever a question involves fractions, take it as product of denominators, right? So this is one strategy which, if you are a part of Jamboree, you would have already noticed it. And there are some people who are listening for the first time. So get the idea. We are going to do a webinar which will help you in GMAT, whether you are taking any prep course or not taking a prep course, correct? So whenever a question involves with fractions, prefer to take it as product of denominators. Now let's say how this simple strategy of taking a product impacts the time management in many other questions which are slightly on a different tangent altogether. So are we clear on this? The point I'm making, that is, when a question involves fractions, take it as product of denominators. A quick yes would be wonderful, please. Or if you're not clear, let me know, I can repeat this. But if the majority is clear, then I'll move on to the next question to show how it works. Please quickly write on a chat if this is clear to you. The point I'm making out here is a question which involves fractions. Rather than taking it as 1 or x, take it as product of denominators. Quick 2 seconds to write a yes, please.
Everything's clear so far?
Perfect, perfect, wonderful, thanks. So let me pick up another question to give you an idea how it works. Now what we are picking up is an actual GMAC officially released question, and see how what we did right now, most of you know to take it as product of denominators, how is that applicable in the given question at hand. So I would request you to try this question. Again, I'll give you a minute and a half, please. Guys, we are picking up an actual question so that you can really experience how a simple strategy can really make a difference in the actual question. But these are old discarded questions released by GMAC officially itself.
There is one comment here that the not able to understand the question. Maybe if you can clarify a little bit more.
Sure. Guys, one of the concerns some people are facing are to understand the question. They have a challenge in understanding the question. So we would start after a minute, but I want you, all those who are attempting this question, to try to understand. Now, this is one of the challenges we need to face while we are attempting the question. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds because I interrupted in the middle. So I'll give you 10 more seconds, and then we'll discuss the question, what it means, how to approach. And then we'll pick up another question on the same level so that you have a complete opportunity to see that in action. 10 more seconds. Okay.
We have 3 answers. D.
Got it. Thank you.
And now one came in as C and one B.
Got it. Now, in this is one of those tough questions on GMAT, and you can acknowledge that out of the people present, only about, I would say, 15 to 20% of the people have been able to attempt the question itself. So let's discuss this question. Now, what is he asking? I totally understand with most of you and acknowledge the situation you are in, most of you. Now, one of the challenges you'll face in the GMAT is to understand what is the question asking. So in that case, let's go step by step. Now it states there's a pipe of 1 yard in length. Yep. Then he says a straight pipe 1 yard in length is marked off at 1/4 and also in thirds. Now what does that mean? That means there's a pipe of 1 yard in length. You need to make the first markings at every 1/3, every thirds. So do you acknowledge the first marking would be at 1/3? Second marking would be at 2/3. And third will typically not be the marking because it will be the tip of the rod if you acknowledge, correct? So what he's doing is, he says there's a pipe of 1 yard in length. You need to make the markings at every thirds. So if you acknowledge the first marking would be at 1/3, second marking would be at 2/3, and the third will typically not be the marking because it will be the tip of the rod, correct? Now, second says, first of all, then you need to make the markings at every 1/4 also, every fourths also. The first marking would be at 1/4. Second marking would be at 2/4. Third marking would be at 3/4. And the fourth again will be the tip of the rod, so no marking as such. So what the question is saying is you first make these markings, right? Then he says if the pipe was then cut into separate pieces at each of these markings. So then it says if you are cutting the pipe at these markings. So do you acknowledge if you cut the pipe at this marking? Let me just change the color of the pen, please, for clarity. Somehow, just 1 second. Okay, so when you make the markings at this point, and then you cut the pipe at this point, then you cut the pipe at this point, do you acknowledge you'll have smaller pipes of different lengths? So what the question is saying is a straight pipe of 1 yard in length was marked off in fourths and thirds, which in the sense we are making these markings. Then if the pipe was cut into separate pieces at each of these markings, then which of the following give all the different lengths of the pieces we'll have? So basically you make the markings first, then you cut the pipe all along these markings, and this pipe will be of different length, this would be a different length, and so forth. Now if I ask you what is the length of this pipe, you would acknowledge that will be 1/4. What will be the length of this pipe? That will be 1/3 minus 1/4, and so forth. Is the question clear to all of us? Now some of us face the understanding of a question. Now is this clear to all of us? A quick yes or a no on a chat will be really appreciated. So you are given a pipe of 1 yard in length.
Everything clear.
Perfect. So now in this case, now what he's asking us is that we make these markings and then you cut the pipe along these markings. So we need to consider what are the different lengths we have, which is absolutely fine for us to calculate all these lengths, correct? The point I want to make out here is he is talking about two fractions, correct? The point we were mentioning in the previous one was you can surely do the way it says there's a pipe of 1 yard in length and then you make the markings and you cut the pipe. The point I want to mention out here is that rather than taking it as 1 or x, if you take it as product of denominators, that will become much more convenient for you. Let me clarify how it works. Rather than taking it as 1, prefer to take it as product of denominators. What's a product of denominators? 12. This 12 is not a random number. It's a product of these two denominators because we are talking about a fraction 1/3 and 1/4, right? Now, what will be 1/3 of 12? That will be 4. The first marking would be at that point. The next 2/3 of 12 would make it 8, and the third is the last step itself. Then you make the markings at every 1/4. That will be at 3, 6, 9, and 12, correct? Now, when you cut these pipes, what will be the length of this pipe? That will be 3 units. What will be the length of this pipe? That will be 1 unit. The point I want to mention out here is it's a very simple strategy, but it will really make a lot of difference on the test date. You will be much more comfortable doing 4 minus 3 rather than subtracting 1 by 4 from 1 by 3, because you are much more comfortable whether you are great at maths or not great at maths. This strategy that your comfort level with integers is always going to be more than your comfort level with typically with the fractions, if I may consider that, right? So dealing with integers in general is much more easier for us. So that will become 2 units, this will become 2 units, this will become 1 unit, this will become 3 units. So if you acknowledge there are 2 pipes of 1 unit in length, there are 2 pipes of 2 units in length, and there are 2 pipes of 3 units in length. Now these are the lengths of pipes we would have gotten had the total length been 12. But the total is 1, so these values will also get reduced by the same fraction or the same ratio. So lengths were 1, 2, and 3 if the total was 12. If the total becomes 1, this would become 1 by 12, this will become 2 by 12, this will become 3 by 12, which further can be reduced to 1 by 12, 1 by 6, and 1 by 4. Are you with me on this part, guys? So the point I'm mentioning out here is you can proceed. First of all, it's important to understand the question, which is a challenge on the test day. So if you acknowledge you are given 2 minutes per question, some bit of a time, whether you call it half a minute or 45 seconds, would be spent typically in understanding what is he asking, right? And then you need to have an approach to answer the question. So when he's talking about fractions, if you take it as product of denominators, it will become much more convenient to deal with integers than deal with fractions. So are we all clear on this, or shall I repeat this? If you're clear, majority of you are clear, then I'll take another example so that you can see that further in action how it works. So quick yes or a no on a chat will again be highly appreciated.
Yes, understood.
Perfect. So guys, let's pick up another example to see how it works, because that will help you build the comfort level with the whole scenario. Again, I'm going to give you a minute and a half. Again, it's an actual question. Again, it's officially released by GMAC. So I would like you to try this question, please. I'm going to give you additional 15 seconds if you're in the middle of the something, and please write the answer on a chat. Okay, yes, please.
Okay.
So what did we get?
Some predominantly B. We have a few C's.
Mm-hmm. How many C's?
4, 5.
Got it.
6, 7.
Okay. Okay. Now, in this, again, a question, it's a very interesting one. Frankly speaking, if you have the time, rarely would anyone mark the previous question wrong, because we all will get an answer. It's typically this question we sometimes make a mistake. Now, if you analyze, all of you understood the question right. Ideally, it's exactly on the same platform, then we should all have gotten it correct. It's in such questions that I'm specifically talking to the people who marked C as an answer, right? So when a question, if you analyze, it's this sort of a question where the fractions, where taking it as a product will make much more sense actually if you acknowledge. So he says you make the markings at every 1/5 and 1/7. Now, do you acknowledge, if you take the question the way it says, it marks from 0 to 1. And if you start making the markings 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and so forth, and similarly 1/7, 2/7, there'll be lot many markings we would have done. And as there will be lot many calculations involved, to be sure that you have marked it right, you'll have to cross-check, which will take a lot of time. So in general, what we are recommending you is, rather than taking it as 1 or x, take it as product of denominators. Now, what's a product of denominators? That is 35, correct? Now, what's 1/5 of that? That is going to be 7. 2/5 is going to be 14. Next number marking is going to be 21. Next is going to be 28. Next is going to be 35. Similarly, 1/5, 1/7 is going to be 5, 10, then at 15, then at 20, then at 25, then at 30, then at 35. Now, what you need to acknowledge is the minimum distance between any two markings is not this. It's between 14, 15, and or you could say between 20, 21. The minimum difference is 1 if the total was 35. If the total becomes 1, that will simply become 1/35, which majority of you would have answered. And if you have done the Jamboree course, you would have already answered that. So my request to you is, what you need to understand is, it's about working in an approach which makes it easier for you on the test date. Even if you took it as one got a right answer, but on the test day, the fewer calculations you will have to do, the more comfortable you will become. So in general, the point I'm making out here is that when you do a percentage based question and you have to choose a value, take it as 100. That would be by far the most convenient value. However, whenever you are dealing a question with fractions, now this comes under the category of the word problems, a broad category, but whenever a question comes under fractions, whether it's a work time problem or this problem or a Venn diagram question, wherever a question involves fractions, rather than taking it as one, take it as product of denominators. Now you need to try this to be comfortable with this so that you can apply on the D-Day. So suddenly thinking that you will save time on the test day will be kind of difficult unless you have practiced the skills to reduce the time on a given question so that you can fundamentally reduce the time on the D-Day. So have you gotten the basic idea that from today onwards, what I would suggest you to do is, whenever you're approaching a question, whichever involves percentages, prefer to take it as 100. In most likelihood, you would already be doing that. However, when he's dealing with fractions, avoid taking 1 or x, prefer to take it as product of denominators, be comfortable with that so that you can fundamentally reduce time in this context, in this type of a questions. If you're clear with that, then we'll move on to the next type where you'll further see how we can reduce time on a geometry based questions. Is this clear to all of us what we are pointing out? It sounds a simple strategy, but that will really play an important role. A quick yes. Are you clear with this so that we can move on to the next part of the whole webinar?
Yes, everything's clear.
Perfect. Thank you. So what we were working on so far was that we picked up a work time problem and talked about how to convert equations, which questions deal with fractions, and to deal in a simpler fashion. The idea is we all know how to approach a maths question to work in a way which becomes convenient for us. It's like keeping it simple for ourselves, right? So let's move on to the next part of the webinar. We've covered this. So let's move on to the next part of the webinar where we will be working on a concept of geometry. Now, if you have analyzed the official guide, you would have seen that from the 2019 version to 2020 version, The fundamental change has been, if I may just put it in one statement, is the inclusion of a lot of geometry questions in the GMAT official guide. And if we go by the standard that official guide is the reflection of the way the questions are going to be asked or what GMAC wants us to prepare, then geometry is one of the very crucial things. Just want to share with you, in the 2020 version, they have added 5 questions on problem solving. All of the 5 are on geometry. So you can understand the importance which GMAC has started giving to geometry, right? So let's do a question or two to make it simple to understand how it works. Uh, let me try a question. Some of you would have already done this question who have been a part of Jamboree. So then we will see how it is further applicable for majority of us. Let's see how it works. I would request you to attempt this question. It's a very standard sort of a question which appears on the reasoning based, which has been a part of GMAC actually. So I would like you to attempt this question. We'll give you a minute and a half again, and then we'll proceed it further. Okay, 1.5 minutes is up, guys. Please take next 10 seconds to write the answer on a chat.
We got only C's so far.
Perfect.
And one D.
Okay. Guys, I would like to give you half a minute more. I want all the answers. Everyone should get right an answer. Right, wrong, doesn't really matter. Anyone who's in the middle who wants to answer the question, please write on a chat. Okay. Fine. There are multiple approaches for this question. Most of you have marked it right. What I want to share with you is, what is he asking? Now I'm using this simple question to give you a broad idea. He says T and U are midpoints of this PS and SR, right? So if you acknowledge, most of you already know that the shaded would actually become a trapezium. Now, what is a trapezium or a trapezoid based on which nationality you are from? Typically on a GMAT, they follow your US system, so they will use the word trapezoid, not a trapezium, correct? So basically shaded is a trapezoid. Trapezoid is a 4-sided figure in which 2 sides are parallel, right? So fundamentally, he's asking the shaded area upon the total area. Now, one of the ways if you analyze is, he's asking the area of a trapezium upon area of a square. Now, first of all, I want to ask you, did anyone started with area of a trapezium? I hope not. But did any one of you start with area of a trapezium that they started using the formula as such? Anyone? If yes, write on a chat. If no, there's no need to write. Anyone among us who started with using the formula for a trapezium, because it's a shaded area is a trapezoid or a trapezium. So someone started with using area for trapezium? I
No.
literally hope not. No, perfect. So first of all, that's a wonderful thing to do, because you need to know what's a trapezium and related formulae on the paper regarding trapezium. However, it does not mean that if you know the area of a trapezium, you need to apply that in the paper, correct? Now, one of the things we would request you to do is try to really keep it simple for yourself. You need to take a step back. Once you read a question, you need to have to step back and analyze what is he asking. See a broader perspective of the question. So what is he asking is the shaded area upon the total area, correct? Now, do you acknowledge total area is area of a square, that will be 7 square. Now, when we are concerned with a shaded area, we don't need to get into a trapezoid formula, because it's not going to be that convenient. Do you acknowledge from this total area, if I subtract this red shaded total area, if we subtract this unshaded area or circled area, we'll be left with a shaded area? So one of the things I'm sure you would have tried in this is, or what we would request you to try is, work in a way which becomes easier for yourself. So what will work is, we'll, rather than using a trapezoid, we'll take the area of a triangle. From that, we'll subtract this white area or the unshaded area. We'll be left with the shaded area. Why would we do that? Because area of a triangle formula is much more convenient than trapezoid formula. So what's the area of a triangle? PSR, that is half into base into height. From that, we'll subtract this area. If you analyze this, will be the midpoint, so it will be 7 by 2. And that again will be 7 by 2. So based on that, we'll subtract half into base into height. That's the area of TSU. You'll be left with the same idea. So that will be 3 by 8, which most of you have answered. Because fundamentally 7 will get cancelled, you'll have a numerical value. So one of the key things is, which you in this particular case, based on the responses, try to work with a formula which is in general more convenient for you. So in general, area of a triangle is much more convenient for you. So stick with the area of a triangle. That's one approach. And most of you would have also thought on a separate approach, which we would request you to do. Try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, this is one strategy. Okay, there are two strategies we're talking about. Number one, in general, try to use the formula which you are much more comfortable with. That goes not only in geometry question, that goes in all across questions. But when you're specifically talking about geometry questions on GMAT, try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, what do I mean by that? Do you acknowledge you can join the midpoints? To make it symmetrical, we need to join this. Now, if you acknowledge the figure is divided into 8 triangles. So what would be the total area? That will be 8 triangles. Shaded area was 3 triangles if you analyze. So area will get, this triangle area will get cancelled. So answer is going to be 3 by 8. That's a straightforward C option. So the key emphasis I'm making is, when you are in general, try to keep it simple for yourself. Really keep it simple for yourself. GMAT is not a formula focused paper. It's not a calculation focused paper. It's a reasoning focused paper. You will typically not come across a question which involves too much calculations or too much formulae, right? So work in a way which becomes easier. And in general, when you're dealing with a geometry question, try to break the figure into symmetrical parts. So let's see the symmetrical parts. How does it help in different level of questions? Because that will give you a whole perspective, right? Let's try now. You will see a probability mixed with geometry and so forth. So let's add a different concept to it. So I would request you to try this question. Now it's again an officially released question. You can see the copyright of GMAC. So this will again give you an idea how it works. So I would request you to try this question. I'm again going to give you a minute and a half, please. This is what you consider a moderate level question. It's not a very tough question, a moderate level question. But once you know the concept that you have to break the figure into symmetrical parts, it will not really matter whether it's a moderate level question or a very tough question or an easy question. The strategies will work in all the level of questions. I'm expecting many people to mark this question correct. Okay, 1.5 minutes is up, guys. 10 more seconds to write an answer on a chat, please. Yes, what do you say, guys? What's an answer? How many?
We have mostly D's and one A.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, as it was a moderate level question, so I'm really happy to see most of us have marked it correct. Now, there are different approaches for it. Now, one of the fundamental approaches, we need to know the shaded area upon the total area, correct? Because he says you randomly select a point inside the largest square. So we can select any point inside the largest square. So total would be all the points inside the largest square, correct? And the favorable are going to be the points within the shaded region. So we stick with a basic formula definition that's a favorable upon total in the probability. You don't need to memorize 10 different formulas, right? So though it's a probability question, let me repeat this. We need to select a point inside the largest square. So we can select any point inside the largest square. So total would be all the points inside the largest square, which will typically become the area of a largest square, because area is accumulation of all the points, right? So total is going to be the area of a largest square ABCD, whereas the favorable would be all the points within a shaded region, which will add up to form the shaded area. So though he's asking probability, it will come out to be simply a geometry based question. That's a shaded area upon the total area. Now, if you are approaching the formula with shaded area upon total area, you can take the total as, now don't take the total as, if someone is thinking of taking it as 1 or x, don't take it as 1 or x, because you'll have to deal with fractions. You know, this is midpoint, this ED is equal to AF. So rather than taking it as 1, prefer to take it as a multiple of 4. At least the calculations will become easier, because you'll end up dealing only with integers. That's one approach. So you could have taken the total as 4 and then proceeded and got an answer. That is, you are using, again, taking it as a product of denominator and answering rather than the 1 or x. That's one general idea we talked about. But in general, in geometry based question, as we discussed, try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, initially, it may seem uncomfortable, but once you try doing it, you will see that the tougher questions that will make much more impact than the easier ones. If you join this symmetrically, you will analyze that this figure can be divided into 16 triangles, or 16 squares in this case, sorry, my bad. So it's a 16 squares. And how many are shaded? 3. So what's going to be the probability? That is 3 by 16. That was the correct answer, which most of you got. That is the option D. So though it was a probability question, but it comes down to simple geometry based question. That's a shaded area divided by the total area. So right now, whichever way you approached, you got a right answer. If you broke the figure into symmetrical parts, it would be easier. More importantly, if whichever way you got, this question was right for most of us. But let's see how this breaking of the figure plays an important role as the level of a question becomes tougher. So let's try the next question. Give a try to this. You will see that conceptually it's the same, but the figure is one step more challenging. Not a very tough one again, but one step more challenging than the previous one. So again, I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes. Again, if you were fine with the previous example, you should be fine with this example. So let's see. But once we have built up the idea through this question, then we'll try the next question, which will be of a next, or I would say a tougher level, which will make the things consolidate all the things in one step. Okay, a minute and a half is up, please.
We have C's only and
Perfect.
one E.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, guys. Again, it was a moderate level question. One of the ways to divide is, as we are pointing out, try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, that is one strategy which you need to keep into consideration while approaching a geometry-based questions. Again, he says you pick up a point inside the larger square. So you can pick up any point inside the larger square. So total would be the complete area of a larger square. Whereas the favorable is the point lying within a shaded region, that is the shaded area. So though he's asking probability, it will come down to again a simple geometry based question, that's a shaded area divided by the total area. So let's, again, the idea which I was mentioning, which I want to emphasize out here, is try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, if you simply draw these two diagonals, you will analyze that the figure can be divided into 16 triangles, right? So in this case, the area total would be 16 triangles and shaded were 4 triangles. So that will come out to be 4 by 16, that is 1 by 4, correct? So previously, most of you again got it right. Previously, now one or two people have marked E as an answer. Some questions you can eliminate by pure logic. Do you acknowledge this area, it's first of all square is divided into 4 triangles. The shaded is surely not half of this, correct? If in each part, the 4 parts we have divided, if it were 2 were shaded, 2 were unshaded, then it would have been half, right? Anyway, so first 3 questions which we worked on this idea were simple level questions. Now let's see how this idea of breaking the figure would really impact a slightly tougher level question. Let's try this. Yeah, I was just checking the questions, guys, you have pasted. I think in one of the questions, there was some typo mistake happened from my end. It had to be just a different letter. I think you pointed out. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. As it's a moderate level question, I'll give you 1.5 minutes is up, but I'll give you half a minute more if you want to write anything. In this case, I would appreciate if all of us could write an answer, whatever you calculated, right, wrong, doesn't really matter.
We have only D's so far and one C just came in.
How many answers we have gotten in this?
About 10.
Out of how many present right now?
Right now, it's 40 people present.
Okay, got it. Guys, in this case, we have gotten so far only 10 answers. Basically, 1/4 of the people have answered it. So I'll give you half a minute more. I need everyone to answer that question because the whole objective is I want a participation from all of us. Because it's our GMAT, we need to take an action ourselves, right? So think, how would you approach it? I'll wait for half a minute more. If you want to write an answer, fine, but at least think about how would you approach it. It's a moderate level question, not a very tough one, not a very easy, but a moderate level question. On a GMAT, it could be, if I have to rate it as something, I would rate it at a level of a 48, scale score of 48. Okay, let's start. So one of the things which we need to understand is, one of the ideas we have been talking about is try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, this is a strategy which you need to keep into consideration while approaching different level of questions. We did square, we did triangles. Now let's pick up this. Now, one of the things you need to acknowledge or remember is that a regular hexagon, which is one of the very common polygons on your paper, is made up of 6 equilateral triangles, correct? So I repeat, a regular hexagon is made up of 6 equilateral triangles, right? If this is the side, this would also be equal to side, this will also be equal to side, this will also be equal to side, and so forth. So if you acknowledge, this will become a sort of a parallelogram. With me on this, guys, everyone? Because opposite sides are equal, both the pair of sides are equal, so it has to be a parallelogram. So if you practice the content on GMAT or you analyze the questions on GMAT, you would, any book you pick up, you would find a question on typically on hexagon, because hexagon is one of the very common polygons tested on your paper. So what you are requested or expected to know is, I would say the word expected as a matter of fact in this case, you're expected to know that a regular hexagon is made up of 6 equilateral triangles. You're not going to prove it out there on the test date. Now, how does it help? Do you acknowledge if you join the midpoints, this, let's say this is O, A, F, E, O will become a parallelogram. And you know that in general, in a parallelogram, if you join the diagonals, it will divide the area into 2 equal parts because bases are going to be equal and heights are going to be equal, right? So if you acknowledge the shaded area, as AE is a diagonal in this, shaded area is equal to unshaded area, that is AFE triangle. Similarly, if you look at the lower part, OEDC, it will again be a parallelogram. CE is a mid, I would say a diagonal, so shaded area will be equal to unshaded area. Similarly, AOCB would also be a parallelogram, in which case the shaded area is equal to unshaded area. So basically, if you acknowledge, there are shaded area, in this case is equal to unshaded, shaded is equal to unshaded, shaded is equal to unshaded. So in the whole hexagon, there are 3 shaded areas, there are 3 unshaded areas. So do you acknowledge the whole area of a hexagon is going to be twice the area of a triangle internal? So hence it will be directly D option, that is 200 raised to multiplied by root 3. So the point I'm making is, if you keep this philosophy into consideration, or the idea that whenever you see a geometrical figure, you have to break the figures into symmetrical parts, you will be able to answer a moderate level question also in a quicker fashion. rather than using some formulas and calculating the area of a triangle and analyzing and going ahead further. There are multiple other ways to do it, but if you break the figure in general, that would become convenient. Guys, are you clear with this idea of breaking the figure and trying to symmetrically divide the figure into convenient figures? If yes, please write on a chat.
Yes, everything is clear.
Okay. So this sounds a very simple strategy. Let me tell you, it's not a rocket science on your GMAT, right? It's a very simple test designed for a person who's working. So they don't expect you to remember too many formulas or too many calculations. There are some simple strategies which can play a very important role in minimizing the time you spend. So far, we have worked on two simple ideas. One was whenever some fractions are given, in general, if you are prepared on GMAT, you would have done the questions, you would know what I'm talking about. That in general, you will come across a question on fractions, take it as product of denominators. It will become way more simpler. When you're dealing with geometry questions, try to break the figures into symmetrical parts, right? Now this was the second part we talked about. Now I'll move on to the third part. We are picking up different areas of, I would say, of your paper so that you can get a holistic picture how, while preparing, if you analyze the strategies and work in a simpler fashion, that will play an important role. So the first part we talked about was, in general, when you are dealing with fractions and I would say percentages, take it as 100, and when you're dealing with fractions, take it as product of denominators. Now you need to start applying this strategy while preparing so that you can see that in action, right? Second, we talked about when you are doing a geometry-based question, try to keep the formula simple first of all, and try to break the figures into symmetrical parts. Now, be very clear. Unless you try this out on the test day, you will not like to take any new chance for yourself. You need to be comfortable that you have done that, you've been there, done that, so that you can apply that. Now let's pick up a different strategy, which I'm pretty sure you already know, that the concept of absolute value, reasoning you would know. We'll build up the basic concept and see how that concept is again applicable in one of the tougher GMAT questions, right? Okay. Now I'll do a quick recap. I'm pretty sure most of you already know it. Anything this x written in the parallel bars is referred to as an absolute value of x. We know absolute value of 5 is 5. I'm pretty sure we know absolute value of minus 5 is also 5, correct? So typically the way we do is, if something in the parallel bars is positive, you write it as it is. If it is negative, you remove the sign and write the positive value, because you know absolute value has to be positive, right? Now this much is fine for the test, but what you need to understand is, why is absolute value always positive? Now again, most of you would already know, what does absolute value of anything signify? I just want to take a step back out here for anyone who doesn't know. We all know about the number line. It goes to positive infinity on the right hand side, similarly -1, -2, and minus infinity on the left hand side. So remember, absolute value of anything signifies the distance of that point from 0 on a number line. So 5 would be somewhere here. Absolute value of 5 means the distance of 5 from 0 on a number line. Now distance is a length. Length has to be positive, hence absolute value is always positive, right? Similarly, -5 would be somewhere here. What's the distance of 0 to -5? That's also going to be 5. So absolute value, in short, signifies the distance. Distance is a length. Length has to be positive, hence absolute value has to be positive, correct? Let's see that in action. So I'm expecting there will be some people who are just starting their preparation. So I'm going to take 2 minutes out here to work on the concept, and then we'll see the application. Now, if I state absolute value of x is equal to 5, right? And if I ask you, what are the possible values of x which will satisfy this expression? I'm pretty sure everyone knows it, or for sure most of us know it, that is plus minus 5. Now, answer is fine, but what is important for us to understand is, what does this expression mean? Now remember, absolute value of anything fundamentally signifies the distance of that point from 0 on a number line. So when I say absolute value of x is equal to 5, fundamentally I'm looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 is equal to 5, right? If I'm the origin, there'll be 2 points equidistant from me, one on the right hand side, one on the left hand side. So remember, whenever x is in the parallel bars, it will always have 2 answers. And equality gives us definite answers. So we'll have 2 definite answers. What are those 2 definite answers? Plus minus 5, right? Now, if I ask you something like this means I'm looking forward. I know you know the answer, but let's analyze what it means. I'm looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 should be greater than 5. We were looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 is equals to 5 in this case. But in this case, we are looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 should be greater than 5. So logically, any value more than 5 would work. Any value less than minus 5 would work, correct? So for example, if I pick up any value, let's say 6, do you acknowledge this distance is more than this distance? Similarly, let's say we pick up minus 8, this distance is more than this distance. So one of the ideas you need to work on is, if you analyze the context of absolute value, typically it's defined in the GMAT in the context of a distance on a number line, right? Let me take an example again. If I ask you, let me actually clarify for anyone who's not clear. What is the distance between 3 and 2, guys? You can just think for a minute. What is the distance between 3 and 2? I'm pretty sure everyone knows 1. Now remember, when you say the distance between 3 and 2, fundamentally the way we do is from this total distance, we subtract this distance. So distance between 3 and 2 is fundamentally calculated through this approach. Though we do it subconsciously, we don't even think too much actually. So remember, when we are talking about distance, there has to be a subtraction sign in the middle. So in other words, you also acknowledge the distance between 3 and 2 would be the same thing as a distance between 2 and 3. So if I say there are 2 points on a number line, the distance between A and B would be the same as a distance between B and A. Correct? So one of the ideas which you need to think in the context of absolute value on your GMAT is in the context of a distance. Let me take a simple example. If I want you to analyze what does this mean, think for a minute, and I would request, I'm sure you will get an answer. What does that mean? And please write, think for a minute. I'll discuss it anyways, and then we'll move on to the question that will go there. What does this mean as such, as an expression? Now remember, to understand what it means, let's go back to basics. What did this mean? We said we are looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 should be equal to 5. Ideally, you should have written it like this. It means I'm looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 0 should be equal to 5. Now we all know this minus 0 is so insignificant, we normally don't even consider it. But in this question, if you analyze, it will make somewhat sense. We are looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 5 should be equal to 3. Which are the values whose distance from 5 should be equal to 3? The term could be on the right hand side, that will be 8. Could be on the left hand side, that will be 3. So do you acknowledge these two values, 8 and 3, are at a distance of 3 units from 5? So this is the way we analyze this expression. In a simple question that will not really matter, you will anyway know it, but in a tougher questions, it will make somewhat sense to analyze it this way. So if you've conceptually sorted it out while preparing, it will become way more simpler. Let me take an example. What does this mean? Now remember, this means I'm looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 10 should be greater than 5, greater than 3, sorry. It means I'm looking forward for the values of x which are farther than 3 units from 10. So the term could be greater than 13 or less than 7. So I repeat, we're looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 10 should be greater than 3 units. So it can be greater than 13 or it could be less than 7. Are we clear on this? So what does this expression mean? We are looking, please write on a chat if you're clear so that we can move on. So we are looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 10 should be greater than 3. In other words, we are looking forward for the values which are farther than 3 units from 10. So the term could be on this side as well as it could be on this side.
Yes, it's
Perfect.
clear.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Similarly, what does this mean? This means thanks for guys, appreciate your participation on a chat. It really helps us to take the group whole as a cohesive part. It really is wonderful. Thank you, appreciate it. So we are looking forward for the values of x whose distance from 10 should be less than 3 units. That means I'm looking forward for the values of x which are within 3 units of 10. So it can be within 3 units on the left hand side as well as on the right hand side. If you consider on the right hand side, it will go till 3 units. If you consider on the left hand side, it will come till 7. So these are the possible values of x which will satisfy this expression. You pick up any value within them, will work. Now, as far as numerals are concerned, it will be easier. But where this approach will work is in a question like this. Now, what does this mean? Now, remember, this means the distance of x from A is equal to the distance of y from A. That's it. It means if A is, let's say this, x and y both are equidistant from A. They could be on the opposite sides. They could be on the same side. Are you with me on this part? So it's the way you interpret the question which will be important. So this typically expression is the distance of x from A. Let's keep the interpretation out for a minute. That we'll try in a question. It means the distance of x from A is equal to the distance of y from A. That is, x and y are both equidistant from A. Is this clear before we move on to the question, guys? A quick yes or a quick no for a repeat, let me know.
All yeses, so
Perfect.
we understand.
Perfect. Let's try this question where you'll see that application. Now, this is again picked up from the official guide, the latest version. It's in the latter part of the question, so you can understand it's one of the tougher questions. So I would request you, I would give you a minute and a half. I would request you to try this question, please. As those who have started, it's a data sufficiency question. I'm sure you would have figured it out by now. So you got to mark the answers in the form of A, B, C, D, E. Yes, please. What's an answer you got, guys? 1.5 minutes is up.
We have C, A, D, both alone are sufficient. 2 is true, C, A, not sure about 1. 3 C's, A, D, quite varied.
How many A's, if possible? Okay. Now, this is one of those questions where thinking on a context of a number line would really make the things easier. Now, you need to notice each and every word in the question as a matter of fact. He says QST are all different numbers. Now, as I mentioned, the reading the question is going to be one of the very critical parts. We said initially when we started that you need to know the basic concepts. You need to understand the question first of all. And when we say understand, you need to notice each and every word. Please look forward for the word different, right? Look forward for the word number. So it's numbers, not integers, right? Okay. Now, what is he asking? He's asking, is Q less than S less than T or not? Now, do you acknowledge? Let's take a step back and analyze in the context of a distance. It's an absolute value. When the absolute value is given, one of the key skills is thinking on the context of a distance. Please look forward for, it's not mentioned whether anything is positive or not positive. But do you acknowledge absolute value of anything will be positive? So if I may say this part would always be positive, that is absolute value of T minus S will be positive, as well as absolute value of S minus Q would be positive. So the right hand side, if you notice, is the sum of two positive values. If the right hand side is a sum of two positive values, the left hand side would, if the right hand side is positive, in other words, the left hand side would also be positive. That is T minus Q would be greater than 0, which would imply T is greater than Q. Is this clear? Is this part clear to all of us on a number line? If you just analyze the right hand side, T minus Q, absolute value of anything is a distance. Distance cannot be negative, correct? And he says they are different, so it can't be 0 also, right? So
Yes,
that's why
clear.
looking for each word is relevant. Perfect. So in this case, right hand side T minus S, absolute value of this is positive, so right hand side is positive, left hand side has to be positive. So you know that T is more than Q. So if you analyze it on a number line, simply T is going to be on the right hand side, Q is going to be on the left hand side. Now what we need to know is, let me take a different color actually for clarity. Let me take a black one, yeah. So in this case, now S could be out here in the region number 1, or S could be in the region number 2, or it could be in the region number 3, correct? Now S is a point on a number line, so it has to be somewhere in this region, right? Now logically think, is it possible that it's in region number 1? If S is out here, what does absolute value of T minus S signify? Do you acknowledge it signifies this complete distance? And absolute value of Q minus S signifies this distance. Do you acknowledge this complete distance plus this distance cannot be equal to this distance? Doesn't make sense. If you acknowledge this complete length plus this length cannot be equal to this length. So in other words, what we can conclude is that S cannot lie in region number 1. Right? I'll repeat this. If S is out here, then S minus T absolute value signifies this complete distance, right? And S minus Q absolute value signifies distance. So what we are thinking is we are analyzing absolute value concept in the context of a distance, right? So this distance plus this distance cannot be equal to this distance. So in short, S cannot be here, right? Let's consider if S is out here, S minus T absolute value signifies this part, S minus Q absolute value signifies this part. Again, this entire distance plus this distance cannot be equal to this distance. So in short, S can neither be in region number 1 nor be in region number 3. So do you acknowledge by default it has to be in region number 2? So, and if you, let me again change the colors for clarity. Just one second. So further, if you analyze logically, this part plus this part is equal to this part makes sense. So if you acknowledge, now most of you have marked C as an answer, but you don't need the second information. The information given in the statement 1 is sufficient. So though it's a simple question, most of you thought, but we end up assuming C, which is not required the case. The A answer, if you thought in the context of a distance, you can evaluate that the statement 1 alone is sufficient to answer the question asked. So you need to start thinking in the context of a distance, because in a question like this, else we typically go wrong. Whereas when we look for the second statement, it just says T is more than Q. We have no clue about S. So B is not, statement number 2 is not sufficient, whereas statement number 1 was sufficient. So answer is going to be the option A. Is this clear to all of us? So in a question like this, basically the point I'm making is when your variables are concerned, now you can't go on plugging the values in this case. I've seen some people in the concept of inequalities or absolute value, start plugging the values. Now, you can't really plug in the values. You need to get the concept in place before you can answer the question accurately. Is this clear to all of us, please?
Yes, everything is clear. There is a question for any other approach to this question.
Okay, so in this case, there are different approaches for a given question, but when, okay, this is what is a very typical sort of a question which appears on your test. We refer to it as a multiple variable, multiple absolute value concept. Now, there are multiple variables given in a question if you analyze. There are multiple variables and multiple absolute values out here. There's an absolute value expression out here and out here. In these sort of a questions, by default, if you make it on a number line, that will be the most convenient approach. Any other approach, if you analyze, you can get this question sorted, but will not be applicable to all the general questions on this sort of a concept. So hence, when there are multiple variables given, multiple absolute value expressions given, we would request you, or we would highly suggest you to use as a number line approach. That is what we call a distance approach, right? Plugging the values, people plugging the values, I understand they consider that as an approach, but that's really not an approach we recommend, right? Okay. So basically the point I wanted to bring across in this webinar was, so far, it's not one approach on the D-Day which can by default get your time management in place. It's the preparation which will help you build up the skills, build up the processes to approach a question which can help. So fundamentally, when you're making a study plan for yourself, there are 3 phases of preparation. One, which we consider as a basic concept building. When you do the basic concept building, make sure you work in an approaches which can be generalized. For example, one of the approaches we talked about today was when fractions are given, take it as product of denominators. Now, we know that you're comfortable with 1 as well as x and any other variable. Technically, you could have taken any variable. All will give you a right answer. But if you build up on taking it as a product, it becomes a second nature to you to deal with that approach, and hence it will become easier. Second, we talked about you need to start working on the second point we talked about was try to break the geometrical figures into symmetrical parts. You need to try that out in a basic building concept so that when you do mastering the concept, when you practice that, it becomes a second nature to attempt that. Similarly, we talked about when you're approaching, we had a limited time, so we could pick up only 3 ideas. When you're talking about an absolute value approach, just give me a second, please. So when you're talking about an absolute value, one of the ideas you need to start thinking, when specifically you can use it in multiple absolute value concepts, but it becomes more relevant when there are absolute multiple variables and multiple expressions on absolute value. So you need to build up at the conceptual level these approaches. And then you practice these approaches, master these approaches. When you master these approaches, then they become second nature to you. Knowing an approach alone will not be sufficient, because at the end of the day, what we have realized is unless you have tried and tested something, you don't try new things on the test date. So to manage time on the test date, you should have practiced those approaches, right? So make sure you practice whatever the best convenient approaches you think on, and then work it out. So this is the broad strategies we recommend. So first step is you build up the concepts, you practice the official guide questions. Then once you practice the general idea, have understood what GMAT is all about, then you do enough practice content to build up those skills. And then at the end of the day, you should initially build up on a topic by topic conceptual mastery, and then you should build up, make yourself comfortable with handling questions from different topic areas, right? So this was the basic strategies we wanted to talk about, how to reduce time. It's not that there is some pill which will help you reduce time. I think we are all mature people, we understand that. So what is important for you is build up these strategies in general, practice them so that they help reduce time, right? So this was from our end on this webinar. Because of a limitation, we have a limited time, we could do these 3 ideas. And thanks for listening. Now we'll be open to question answer if anyone has any general idea. Now, in the meanwhile, you can put your questions on our chat. In the meanwhile, a couple of people have put in the questions, I'll answer it. Now, one, Faraz Mohammed is asking, excuse me if I pronounce your names wrong, please forgive me for that. So first thing is, what is the general level of most of the questions in OG? Now you need to acknowledge the OG is designed to address the GMAT test takers globally, right? There are different nationalities which are more comfortable with maths, which are less comfortable with maths. So official guide is a representation of all levels. There will be a 10 percentile question in that. There will be a 95 percentile question in that. So it will have all the levels. It depends upon for us what level you are targeting. So let's say you are targeting a very high-end score. So at your level, there will be a limited number of questions in official guide. But as a general, OG covers all levels. Right? Does it answer your question? Okay. Akanksha is asking, I'm a little weak in data sufficiency questions. How do I work on that? Akanksha, first of all, I think you are aware, this concept of this format of data sufficiency was introduced in testing industry by GMAC in 1954, right? So what happens is the DS questions, now in general, what we have encountered is, this is one of the common questions I encounter always. Problem solving questions, the way you approach a question is you read a question, you analyze it, you apply common sense, you apply formulae, you get an exact answer, or you sometimes do process of elimination, or you substitute the values at times to get a most appropriate answer. Now what happens in data sufficiency is he's asking, is the data sufficient to answer? So what is required in data sufficiency is a crystal clarity about the concept. So if your DS is weak, that fundamentally means somewhere, whichever topic you are making more mistakes in DS, it means fundamentally there is a lack of conceptual clarity about that topic, right? In general, if you have just started, initially everyone faces challenges in data sufficiency vis-a-vis problem solving, because data sufficiency is more conceptual oriented questions. So, but once you become comfortable with the concepts, then DS questions, data sufficiency questions, will actually become simpler, right? So if you're weak on data sufficiency, do not bother too much alone on data sufficiency. Make sure you go on practicing and make sure you understand the concepts thoroughly well. Once you have gotten that, you'll be able to approach these questions. And just want to share with you, if anyone has to leave, so in that case, I'll put the other slide. If you want to know any questions we were not able to answer, you can get in touch with us. We can send you whatever queries you have, which I have not been able to answer in this webinar. Any support structure you need, please feel free to get in touch with us, or you get in touch with the portal through which you logged in. Right? I'll carry on with the answers. Abhishek is asked, just one second, please. While solving a question. Okay, one Abhishek is asked, Vaibhav Rana is asking, while solving a question, I tend to recheck my answers before moving on to the next question. Now, because of the time management being important, Vaibhav, you will not have the time in the paper to recheck the answers. So I can understand the relevance of rechecking the answers in the first 2 or 3 questions. Why? Because you just want to be sure that you don't click a wrong answer. But I understand normally a person it may not be true for you, but normally a person checks if a person is not too much confident on the prep or the question. So one of the reasons is you should be prepping enough so that you don't need to cross check. However, if you have a limited time, you will not have the time to cross-check your answer. So you need to highly avoid that, because else the time management becomes a really a challenging issue. Okay. One second, I'm having a challenge in accessing your question poll. I think I'll need to reset it for a minute. Just give me a second.
Amit, if you want, I can read out the questions for you so that you can answer them.
Yes, just one second, sir. Yeah.
So Faraz is asking us, how sufficient is OG material for quant for a 690 score, 690
Perfect.
plus score? I have noticed most questions are similar across OGs.
Perfect. Faraz, you're asking, as sir has pointed out, the question you're asking is OG sufficient? Now, that's one of the things which you need to acknowledge. Fundamentally, majority of the skills which GMAC is testing on in GMAT are there in the official guide questions. So I want to restate this. Fundamentally, the skills which GMAC is asking are in the official guide questions. However, now the challenge lies out here is, when we as an individual approach the OG questions, sometimes we go on solving the questions and not understand the skills behind the questions. So if you understand the skills behind the questions, then it's enough. But majority of the questions, in my 2 decades of experience with teaching GMAT student, what I've normally noticed is we go with completion of an OG and we don't understand the skills, or we have a limited information about what is the skill GMAC is asking in that particular question. So hence we need to complement that with an additional practice. So though technically official guide has enough content, has all the skills being, fundamentally majority of the skills being tested. Now what matters is, have you as an individual learned all the skills? Please let me know, Faraz, if that answers your question.
Okay, there is another question here. What are the other books other than the OG to practice?
With due regards, this was a general, the webinar to inform you about the GMAT. Now, there are enough books available. Every prep course which has been designed for GMAT every institute or whichever is closest to you, wherever you have an access, would have, if I really do not know which is the closest prep course to you guys, every prep course, as far as I have come across, designs their own course curriculum. We believe in our course curriculum, but I'm pretty sure other competitors, other prep courses are equally valid and equally informative. So it depends upon what course access you have as an individuals. So I want to be very clear out here. I'll be biased towards the course which Jamboree as an organization is providing, but I do not at the same time want to invalidate the content of the other competitors' prep courses which would be available to you. So you see what access is available to you. We strongly believe with due regards in our content, and I'm pretty sure others would believe in their content. So I would say OG is not enough. You need to complement it with the other prep course. However, I would like to leave the final decision to yourself, that which prep course material you would choose to do. Yes, please. Next.
What score should I get in Jamboree full-length tests to secure 700 plus in the GMAT exam?
We at Jamboree offer 3 types of courses. One is an online, one is a classroom course, and one is a live course. All the courses are designed on the same philosophy. All will teach you the same ideas. I would say if you have any specific query, in that case, we should be interacting with you as an individual and try to address your course. What are your individual requirements? Because There is no one pill which will work for everyone. We as an organization have the same philosophy of or a pedagogy which we have. However, we need to understand what course works for you based on the time requirement you have and what are you looking for, and then we can guide you. In that situation, you can mail us and someone from Jamboree will get in touch with you to guide you what is the best suitable thing for you. So this may not be the right platform because there are many other people. I should not be individually focused on one person's answer. That's what with due regards I would say in this. Next question, please.
Okay, we are approaching the end of the webinar anyway, so this would be the last question that we will answer. And of course, we will answer all of the questions that were not addressed during the webinar and emails afterwards. The last question is, which approach is better, solving and then looking for answer in options, or picking up options and put it in question, or both?
Got it. And that's a very brilliant question. So just want to share with you, we need to take a step back on that and understand the GMAT test as a whole. Number one, there are two formats of the questions, which one is problem solving, one is data sufficiency. Now the approach which whoever asked the question was, can we plug in the values? When you're plugging the values from the options, you are not building up on the concept, right? Whereas to address at least majority of the questions, or I would say the data sufficiency questions, you will need to know the reasoning. So while you are preparing, you should be fundamentally focusing on understand the reasoning and and building upon your conceptual clarity, because at least plugging the values or backtracking will surely not work in data sufficiency. So if you're putting the values from the options, that is surely not going to work in data sufficiency, number one. So when you're practicing that, you're really not practicing, number one. Second, the way the GMAT designs the questions, each option seems to be a relevant option. Now you need to take a step back. GMAT puts the options for a reason. So it's important for you that don't plug in the values back from the options, whereas you understand the question, solve it, and then answer the question. So we highly recommend, at least for half of the questions, for majority of for data sufficiency question, the approach will anyway not work. So what we would recommend is, when you're preparing for a GMAT, as it's a reasoning oriented paper, so you need to build up on the conceptual clarity and the understanding to maximize your scores. Plugging back the options will not work. However, on the test date, if it's a problem solving question and you have, should not happen, but if you are not able to understand the concept, then yes, rather than leaving that question in the end or marking any option like by randomly, it's better to plug in the values and get an answer. However, while preparing, that is not the right strategy.